Hello everyone, I'm Liu Bei.
And I'm Xiaolei.
Today we're covering Didi, the D in TMD, the Toutiao Meituan Didi trio. Let's start with a quick rapid-fire round. Xiaolei, this is your test. What business did Didi start with? What kind of car?
Taxis.
Hey, straight to the answer. I was ready to give you multiple choice. You really got it right.
Because back when I was an intern, I happened to interview people around Didi and some of its early businesses. Around 2013, the taxi business was already facing government directives, regulatory meetings, warnings, and early restrictions. Not exactly an app store takedown, but regulatory pressure was present very early.
Right, very early, around 2013. Next question. Who was Didi's main competitor in the early days?
Oh, I might not remember that.
Kuaidi.
That counts as early, right?
It does? I thought Kuaidi came later.
It counts. The earliest ones we'll mention later. But for many listeners today, Kuaidi itself is probably already an unfamiliar name. Think about it. That was almost 10 years ago. Before Didi went public, how many funding rounds had it completed? It was famous for raising a lot of money.
Then I'll just guess. 12 rounds?
22 rounds. In total, about RMB 79 billion raised. That became one of Didi's defining traits. Among unicorns, it may be one of the most heavily funded companies in global history. Some people even say there's no one of. Its fundraising was ferocious. Next, what was the earliest major premium car service in China?
I'll guess Didi.
No, this one is not what people instinctively think of. It was 易到用车. It was years earlier than Didi, and at the beginning, it focused on a more premium category, private car or chauffeur-style service. The model was different. We'll explain that later. When Uber first entered China, who were its earliest competitors?
That's a hard one. I feel like I have to guess Didi.
It sounds as if the answer should be Didi, but not at first. Uber entered China with premium cars, not taxis. It wasn't in the same battlefield yet. Its early competitors were Hangzhou and Yidao. Didi has done a lot of international expansion. Which country is its biggest and strongest overseas market?
South America? Brazil?
Exactly, South America, especially Brazil. Mexico is also important. One last question. According to a 2019 report from China's Supreme People's Court, which had the higher crime incidence rate, traditional taxis or ride-hailing?
You're clearly setting something up for later. Taxis.
Yes, taxis. About 13 times that of ride-hailing. We'll return to that later. All right, that's it for rapid fire. Our usual 7 questions. Let's start from the beginning. Act 1, first stop. In May 1983, Cheng Wei was born in Qianshan County, Shangrao, Jiangxi. In 2000, Cheng Wei was admitted to Beijing University of Chemical Technology. Supposedly, his grades were originally pretty good, and I'm not saying Beijing University of Chemical Technology is a bad school, but compared with the top schools in Beijing, the cutoff is lower. The story is that during the math exam, Cheng Wei was in a hurry and left 3 big questions unfinished. 3 big questions on the Gaokao. How much of a hurry was he in? Was he rushing home for dinner? Anyway, he ended up not going to an even better school and went to Beijing University of Chemical Technology. In 2004, at 21, Cheng Wei graduated with a major in administrative management. When you hear administrative management at Beijing University of Chemical Technology, you can imagine it wasn't the easiest profile for finding a job. That year, he changed jobs 7 or 8 times and wasn't satisfied with any of them. He tried all kinds of things, selling insurance, working around foot massage businesses, opening shops, all sorts of odd jobs. At one point, he even did foot massage work. Later, Cheng Wei decided to try his luck in Hangzhou. I looked into the exact reason and couldn't find a completely clear answer. He hasn't really explained why he chose Hangzhou. There are accounts saying he saw the opportunity in the internet. In any case, in 2005, he joined Alibaba, and that meant he caught Alibaba at a very early stage.
Wow, that timing.
Exactly. He arrived right when Alibaba needed people like him. He was, how should I put it, socially experienced and very good at dealing with people. Back then, he led a team of only 4 people and competed against hundreds of sales teams nationwide. It was like nationwide horse racing. Some teams had more people, some had fewer, and everyone was judged directly by the team's sales results. With a 4-person team, Cheng Wei ranked 3rd nationwide against hundreds of teams.
And most of those teams were much bigger.
You're right. In 2011,
Cheng Wei became the youngest regional sales manager in Alibaba's B2B or business-to-business division, the youngest among all regional sales managers. He was clearly one of the rising stars. He was then transferred to Alipay's B2C or business-to-consumer division as deputy general manager. Cheng Wei was famous for being extremely hardworking. Years later, Yahoo co-founder Jerry Yang said in an interview that the entrepreneur he admired most was Cheng Wei. Jerry Yang specifically said Cheng Wei worked 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. I vaguely remember we may have mentioned something similar in an earlier episode about Uber, that Cheng Wei was exceptionally diligent.
Maybe. I don't remember either. It's been too long.
His experience in sales, that battlefield training, became very useful later. You'll notice that the titles of our section today all have war imagery. We also mentioned in the Wang Xing episode that Cheng Wei and Wang Xing got to know each other through Alipay, because Cheng Wei was deputy general manager of the Alipay business division and negotiated cooperation with Wang Xing's side. Wang Xing was extremely sensitive to the mobile internet. We've talked about that before. Through dealing with people like him, Cheng Wei gradually learned more about mobile internet and developed his own views on the future of mobile phones and mobile services. In 2012, Cheng Wei went to his old leader Wang Gang to discuss entrepreneurship. Wang Gang is another extraordinary figure who is often talked about in Alibaba circles, especially in the Hangzhou investment world. He was an old Alibaba employee, formerly the head of Alibaba's B2B Beijing region, that is, one of the leaders of the Iron Army Beijing region, and later head of Alipay's merchant business division. Since Cheng Wei was deputy general manager there, he reported to Wang Gang. Wang Gang's Alibaba nickname was Lao Dan, the Lao Dan of Laozi. Wang Gang was also a skilled Texas Hold'em player and often played cards at Jack Ma and Zhang Ying's home. In the early days, he was the person who brought Cheng Wei into Alipay. When he recruited Cheng Wei was still thinking, my B2B work is going pretty well. Wang Gang told him, no, you need to have bigger dreams. You need to keep working hard. So he pulled Cheng Wei into Alipay. Later, after retiring from the operating side, Wang Gang made a very clear decision. He knew he no longer had the energy to start a company himself, so he became an investor and set up a family office-style operation. In China's venture capital world, that was very early. Today, people are used to the idea that once someone has achieved financial freedom, they may do angel investing. But Wang Gang did it very early. At the time, Wang Gang believed that in the mobile internet era, people and cars were definitely going to be connected. He derived 7 possible models. Of course, some of those models later proved unreliable, but the core ones, matching people with freight, matching passengers with drivers, were later proven to be huge businesses. He invested in both. Besides Didi, which we are discussing today, he also invested in Manbang, a major freight matching platform. He also considered businesses such as car washing and auto finance, though those were less successful. Wang Gang was once considered an O2O, or online to offline investment heavyweight, on a par with Zhu Xiaohu. He focused on online to offline businesses. In car-related businesses alone, he invested in Yunmanman, OFO-related driving school projects, Youyongche, Dian Yangche, and others. So Zhu Xiaohu would sometimes spread some money in front, and once Wang Gang came in, he could help assemble the game, introduce CEOs, bring in executives, connect resources. The two of them played off each other. Back to 2012. Around Chinese New Year, we talked in the Alibaba episode about the Weizhe incident. That was a huge shock. A lot of Alibaba B2B Iron Army executives and managers left then. Gan Jiawei joined Meituan around that time. So one Weizhe incident can be said to have helped create at least 2 giants, Meituan and Didi. Cheng Wei was also thinking, if I leave, what do I do next? Wang Gang advised him, let's do the mobility business. Wang Gang put in RMB 700,000, Cheng Wei put in RMB 100,000, but Wang Gang was extremely generous with equity. Wang Gang took 30%, Chang Wei took 70%. Basically, you go do this. He gave Chang Wei a great deal of trust. Chang Wei returned to Beijing to build a team. But he came from sales. In B2B, he had hardly touched product or R&D. He couldn't code, unlike Wang Xing or Po Nima, who were programmers and wrote code themselves in the early days. What about the earliest version? He had no choice but to outsource it. It was terribly unreliable. He spent RMB 80,000, still real money back then, and anyone familiar with outsourcing knows how hard quality control can be. You don't necessarily find the right people. The result satisfied nobody. A driver who was asked to use it even said, "Are you guys colluding with the telecom operators to cheat us out of data traffic? Data is expensive now. Are you giving us this garbage app to scam us?" It didn't look like a usable product at all. The experience was very poor. On the first day after the new version launched, after all that effort, there were only 16 drivers online nationwide.
That was Didi's beginning. 16 drivers, all acquired through ground promotion. Fortunately, very early on, Chang Wei recruited talent from what you might call the Wanpua Military Academy of Chinese Technology, Baidu. This is one of the important advantages of starting a company in Beijing. You're close to Baidu. Without Baidu, it would have been hard. Baidu was like a whale fall. When one whale falls, the whole ecosystem grows. Meituan also hired plenty of people from Baidu. This time, Didi hired Zhang Bo. Born in 1983, a Wuhan University graduate, he had been one of the technology leads for Baidu's mobile business. His formal rank wasn't especially high, but he had ideas. At that time, he wasn't in Beijing, he was in Weihai. Why Weihai? Because his own startup had failed, and he was there looking at the sea, reflecting on life and wondering what to do next. Cheng Wei talked to him, and Zhang Bo thought, "This project sounds pretty good." So he joined as technology lead and later became Didi's longtime CTO. Because people like Zhang Bo came from large companies, they set a strategic direction early: focus. Even though the first product was not reliable, the strategy sounded reasonable. They would focus on being a two-sided matching platform. First, no illegal black car business. Anything the government didn't allow, they wouldn't do. Second, no price markups or complicated commission system at the beginning. The point was cold start, not monetization. Third, no accounts or financial products. Drivers and passengers would settle offline themselves. Fourth, no hardware, too heavy. Once those four don'ts were set, the product finally became more credible, and the Didi-Dache app was iterated into better shape. Here we should mention one detail. The earliest Didi was not consistently rendered as Didi at first. For generation, we will use Didi throughout. The name came from the beep beep sound of hailing a car by honking the horn. That makes sense. There was also a practical trademark issue. An earlier version of the name had already been registered by a Ningbo company called Miaoying, and that trademark covered computer programs. After Didi became popular, Miaoying sued and sought RMB 80 million in compensation, so Didi had to change the name. Now let's ask another question. If you're starting a ride-hailing platform from zero, you have a few options. Suppose you've built a product and now you need to launch. Which do you choose? Option A: recruit drivers yourself, rent or buy cars yourself, and build your own fleet. Option B: let people bring their own cars and join your platform after registration. Option C: work directly with taxis. Which one do you choose? This is a major question. It directly determines whether the business can get off the ground. Xiaolei said earlier that, from the outcome, Didi started with taxis. But at the time, this was not an obvious default. Many platforms chose other directions. Some did self-operated fleets. Others recruited private car owners. Those models could work regionally, but it was hard to scale. The cold start difficulty was too high because they were too heavy. The two companies that later succeeded both started with taxis. After Didi-Dache had some traction in Beijing, its biggest rival was not Kuaidi. It was Yao Yao Zhao Che, literally shake shake call a car. The name was extremely straightforward.
Right, that was the time period I was thinking of.
Right, but do you remember Yao Yao Zhao Che?
Not really. We may have been in Beijing at the time, but I probably didn't take taxis much. Maybe I was still in school.
The name was direct, and its founding team was actually pretty strong. The founder, Wang Weijian, came from the car rental industry. It had funding from Sequoia and Zhen Fund, top-tier investors, totaling $3.5 million. Compare that with Didi's RMB 800,000. How do you fight that? One side looks like an elephant, the other like an ant. But there was a problem. Yao Yao Zhaoche was doing self-operated premium cars. It had its own fleet. The core problem with building your own fleet is that in the beginning, you cannot scale supply. During market cultivation, you can't instantly cover all of Beijing. With limited supply, users open the app and can't get a car. Then, it's not the instant ride-hailing experience we imagine today. It becomes more like booking a car in advance, almost car rental. I wake up in the morning and need to go somewhere at 4 p.m., so I book ahead. There is a market for that, but the frequency is much lower. For ride-hailing platforms like Didi, you need enough vehicles and a large enough network for the experience to be good. Here's a rough calculation. If you want all passengers to have an average ETA of 3 minutes, ETA meaning average waiting time, and 3 minutes is already not especially short, how many cars do you need running inside Beijing's 5th Ring Road on one platform? The answer is 30 to 40,000. You need 30 to 40,000 cars circulating in that area to support a 3-minute ETA. If you have even a bit fewer, it immediately becomes 10, 15, or 20 minutes. The network effect is extremely obvious.
And how is a startup supposed to build a fleet of 30 to 40,000 cars? Even if you have money, 3.5 million is not enough. They should have used three-wheelers.
And even if you had supply, passengers might not know about you. Suppose you somehow get a few thousand cars online, but passengers aren't there yet. Drivers don't get orders. What do? You have to subsidize drivers, and then the funding gap opens up fast. You have to balance both sides. That is the classic cold start problem of a two-sided platform. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So Didi's choice was the most practical. Find an existing chicken. Or maybe a duck, close enough, the eggs are similar. And work with taxis first. Didi's methods were wild in those early days. They had very little money, so they came up with scrappy tricks. For example, Yao Yao Zhaoche was flush with cash and ran ads on Beijing traffic radio. Back then, traffic radio was not like today. Everyone listened to it. In Beijing, it was dominant, 103.9. Yao Yao was spending hundreds of thousands on ads. Didi also wanted to advertise there, but couldn't afford it. Then they realized they could piggyback after Yao Yao's ad. How? Right after the Yao Yao Zhaoche ad ended, a line would come in. Didi ad. Call this number to download and install Didi Dache. The bet was that ordinary listeners couldn't distinguish Yao Yao from Didi. They heard Yao Yao's ad, then heard a phone number and thought, oh, I can download that app here. They didn't notice that the name had changed.
Wait, on radio? I worked in radio, and it's hard for me to imagine how that was arranged. You'd have to get some internal cooperation. Not necessarily under the table, but the station decides how ads are sequenced. You can't normally decide that yourself.
Right, the story is told that way. We don't know whether it's fully accurate, but people do remember it as an early anecdote. I've never encountered something like that myself. Maybe they just made the request directly. In any case, it's funny and a little sneaky. Yao Yao definitely wouldn't let them keep doing it. There was also ground promotion. Yao Yao could work openly with airports and train stations and set up proper booths. Didi had no choice but to take less formal spots. Sometimes they put up improvised stands in places that might not be fully compliant. When managers came to chase them away, they had to dodge. They targeted taxi drivers and asked, "What phone do you use? Can it install apps? Let me install this for you. If you use it, you'll get a few more orders." Didi also understood that taxi drivers were usually taking orders while driving, so the product needed voice prompts. Starting around this time, Didi added voice broadcasts. "You have a new order. Do you want to accept?" That was important. They also went around office buildings and worked with taxi drivers to put promotional stickers on their cars. Wherever they could stick an ad, they stuck one. At one point, because there were more drivers than passengers, Chengwei even gave people RMB 400 and told them to go around the 3rd Ring Road hailing rides, specifically Didi rides.
Wow,
In the early days, that's what you had to do.
that's interesting.
What else could you do? For taxi drivers, if there are no orders for several days and no subsidies, they'll stop using it. So the question becomes, where should the money go? Do you simply hand subsidies to drivers, or do you use the money to create actual orders and teach drivers the process? Xiaolei caught the key point. Giving money directly is less effective than creating a match so the driver goes through the flow, accepts an order, picks up a passenger, completes a ride. Then he understands how to use the product. This is why, when we criticized the Yuanbao Red Envelope campaign on the Banda Weekly segment, a later cash reward promotion that mostly spammed the group chats, the point was that it was just harassment. By contrast, in the early days of payment red envelopes, people really used the payment function. The experience was completely different. In November 2012, after Didi had been operating for a few months, Beijing had a big snowstorm. That snow mattered a lot to Didi. Many people couldn't get taxis, and Didi's traffic suddenly rose. They got a stroke of luck. For the first time, daily orders broke 1,000, a milestone. But even that 1,000 orders soon looked small, because 2012 to 2013 was the beginning of China's mobile internet era. We've said this many times. The year one moment meant everyone started using smartphones. In 2012, when Didi first started, many people resisted or didn't understand. They didn't see how many smartphones there would be in the future.
Second, taxi drivers were mostly middle-aged men. Smartphones were something young people played with. How would drivers use smartphones? Third, the taxi industry was closed and complicated. How could a startup intervene? At the time, none of these questions looked easy. Today, the third one seems hardest. But back then, people genuinely thought middle-aged drivers using smartphones was almost impossible. On the closed industry issue, Cheng Wei actually went to the Beijing Municipal Commission of Transport very early and demonstrated the product to officials. He sent a few requests from the passenger side and waited for the driver's side to receive orders. They waited and waited. No orders came in. The technology was simply too poor at the time. Later, when he did demos, he brought several phones just in case, with multiple driver-side devices so that at least one of them might ring. It was a technical issue. In any case, after the demo, the Transport Commission could only say, "That's nice, keep working on it." It wasn't going to give him strong support. The winter of 2012 was cold, and for Cheng Wei, it was cold in more than one sense. He couldn't see clearly whether 2013 would bring an opportunity. In the show notes, we'll include a screenshot of Didi's earliest interface. Xiaolei, you can take a look.
The interface is actually quite clear. The core structure isn't that different from today. Open the app and the home screen is a map. At that time, there were still very few cars, so it could show all the cars in Beijing on the map. Wow, there really weren't many. At the bottom, there were tabs: location, route, traffic, more. In the middle, the biggest main button said, "Call a car now."
That brings us to Act 2. Act 2, second stop. By the end of 2012, Didi had basically burned through its money. RMB 800,000 really doesn't last long. It was gone quickly. Then, GSR Ventures, a venture capital firm associated here with Zhu Xiaohu, the well-known investor focused on the sharing economy and online-to-offline businesses, came in with timely help and provided a $3 million Series A. Before that money arrived, Wang Gang had lent the company some money to keep it going. In Beijing, Yao Yao Zhao Che's numbers were gradually being caught by Didi. Product experience mattered. The taxi co-start model mattered. All of it mattered. Later, people only remember Didi as a company with deep pockets. But in the early days, Didi spent money carefully where it mattered. Yao Yao Zhao Che was the one spending like a rich company. A significant portion of its $3.5 million went to giving phones to drivers. If drivers didn't have smartphones, Yao Yao would give them phones. The total cost reportedly reached more than RMB 20 million. With that approach, how many taxis can you really cover? Officially, Yao Yao claimed it had covered 20,000 Beijing taxis, but that was the claim at the time, and it didn't perform as well as Didi. By mid-2013, news had already emerged that Yao Yao Zhao Che was having financial difficulties. By 2014, it had basically disappeared. Very fast. In hindsight, by 2014, the broader battle had already moved far beyond it. This was Didi's first battle. Compared with what came later, it was a small battle. After Didi established itself in Beijing, it began expanding nationwide. The first stop was Shanghai.
Which company did Alibaba invest in?
To answer that, we need to start with another person, Chen Weixing. Chen Weixing was born in 1983, the same year as Cheng Wei. He is from Shaoxing, Zhejiang. After high school, he entered Beijing University of Chemical Technology. You heard that right. He and Cheng Wei were schoolmates, same year. What a coincidence. But Cheng Weixin was different. After 1 year, he felt the school wasn't right. He dropped out, repeated the exam, and got into Zhejiang University, studying civil engineering. In college, he was very active and served as chairman of Zhejiang University's Science and Technology Association. He was already starting businesses. In 2007, he and several classmates founded Fun City Technology, a web game company. That company became very famous and very profitable. He noticed the taxi problem while doing the game business. He himself found taxis hard to get in Hangzhou and thought there might be an opportunity. Hangzhou had about 12,000 taxis. He estimated that each taxi handled about 25 orders a day. Each order averaged 20 RMB 20, giving daily transaction volume of about 6 million RMB. Nationwide, there were roughly 30 cities at Hangzhou scale. That meant daily transaction volume of 180 million RMB. If the platform took 1%, that would be 1.8 million RMB in revenue per day.
So the business model was clear.
Exactly. So 快的大车 was started in Hangzhou. For listeners unfamiliar with it, 快的 means roughly fast taxi hailing. 快 means fast, and 的 echoes 打的, the everyday phrase for taking a taxi. Kuaidi's model was similar to Didi. Passengers issued orders with one tap. Drivers could grab orders. Very early on, 快的 let passengers add a tip to compensate drivers for empty driving and make drivers more willing to take the order. That was especially important when supply was insufficient early on. If a pickup was far away, passengers could add a few yuan and drivers would be more willing to come. Early platforms didn't have as many mechanisms for regulating drivers and passengers as they do today. Today, passengers have ratings, drivers have service scores, platforms can control behavior, and problematic drivers can be suspended. In the earliest days, the platform was just a matcher. If problems occurred after matching, the platform didn't manage that much. The most common problem wasn't even serious disputes. It was simple. You called a car, the driver accepted, you waited 10 minutes and then couldn't find the driver, or the driver simply didn't come. What could you do? So Kuaidi introduced the point system to prevent both sides from no-showing. This was earlier than Didi. If a driver's score got too low, even negative, the platform could stop dispatching orders to him. Kuaidi also added voice messages and image sending. That mattered. After you got a car, you could send a voice message or a photo to show where you were. I'm at this corner of the intersection. 2 months after launch, Kuaidi already had more than 300 drivers online each day, more than 300 daily orders, and over 100 actual completed orders. Early on, one important source of supply came from WeChat taxi groups in Hangzhou. Even today, there are such carpooling or driver groups, though the model was primitive. This wasn't passenger-side carpooling. Drivers would say in a group, I have a passenger going here, can someone nearby pick them up? Another driver would take it. It was a relatively inefficient way to match supply, but it existed. About 100 drivers joined Kuaidi in bulk this way. Soon after launch, Alibaba's investment team, right next door in Hangzhou, smelled the opportunity and came over. They wanted to invest in Kuaidi. At the same time, Li Zhiguo from Amoeba Capital also wanted in. Alibaba originally didn't want others involved. Let us invest directly. Li Zhiguo said, I can bring someone. I can bring a CEO. At Chen Weixing's suggestion, Alibaba agreed. Li brought in Lu Chuangwei. Chen Weixing himself couldn't manage the whole operation. He was the founder, but later business operations were mainly run by Lu Chuangwei. Lu had previously handled overseas markets at UT Starcom, a telecom equipment company that was essentially the main manufacturer behind China's Xiaolingtong, or personal handyphone system. He had also worked on original equipment manufacturing projects for Samsung and Motorola phones, and had done online-to-offline investment in the United States.
He is also part of the Hangzhou startup investment world. After Liu Chuanwei joined Kuaidi, its product and R&D capabilities rose to another level. In mid-2013, Kuaidi entered Shanghai earlier than Didi and seemed ready to sweep nationwide. That was the situation Cheng Wei faced. Didi had stabilized in Beijing, but in Shanghai, Kuaidi was gaining momentum. And Kuaidi had Alibaba's money. Giant money is different from ordinary VC money. Tencent was also looking for an opportunity and was bound to act. It had even been talking to Yao Zhao Che. So, even defensively, Didi had to take Tencent's money and get Tencent involved. The foot came out of the foot bath, and Tencent's foot went in. After Cheng Wei and Wang Gang finished their foot massage shop discussion, they rushed to raise money. In April 2013, Didi received $15 million in its Series B. That was an entirely different level from the original RMB 800,000. By the end of 2013, competition was still relatively calm, like water in a cup, small ripples but not a storm. The two sides competed through product, R&D, and ordinary operations. But at the end of 2013, things changed. Kuaidi, backed by Alibaba, began integrating with Alipay. It first promoted the service on 5,000 taxis in Beijing. Passengers saw a QR code and could pay taxi fare directly with Alipay. In Beijing, if you used Alipay to pay for a taxi, you had a chance to receive a single trip waiver of up to RMB 200 or RMB 5 cash rebate.
That's not a small incentive.
The advantage of online payment was huge. It really was convenient, especially for people who already had money in Alipay. Scan once and the fare was settled. Taxi fares often included small odd amounts, and paying those bits and pieces in cash was annoying. Once online payment started to take off, it became a superior experience. Didi, of course, didn't care how good Alipay was in itself. Why would they? Cheng Wei even came from Alipay. The old employer was doing well, fine, but Kuaidi's product experience improved, and Kuaidi's orders started rising fast. That put Didi in danger. Didi had to implement Scan to Pay quickly too, using WeChat. At first, Didi created personal accounts for drivers. It was like preloading money. Once the settlement period arrived, drivers could withdraw. But that created a poor experience for drivers. They didn't want to wait until the end of a period or until a threshold. When they could see an amount in the app, they wanted the right to withdraw it at any time. Not every driver would actually withdraw immediately, but they wanted the option. What could Didi do? It had to advance the money. Didi would prepay, effectively putting up the cash. But once Didi had advanced too much, it couldn't cover some withdrawals. When drivers tried to cash out, the app displayed the words insufficient balance. Drivers were confused. Didi's balance is insufficient? This company is about to collapse. This is what happens when product wording isn't thought through. They probably casually wrote the phrase insufficient balance, but drivers interpreted it as a company's balance being insufficient, like a bank about to fail. Driver groups exploded. Withdraw quickly, it's going under. A bank run began and deteriorated rapidly. At the time, Didi had dollar financing, but dollars took time to arrive.
He had rich experience and was older than a typical young founder. After several conversations while he was in the US, Liu felt the opportunity was good and returned to China specifically for it. Li Zhiguo, whom we mentioned in the Alibaba episode, was Alibaba employee number 46. He is better known as founder of Koubei.com and later chairman and CEO of Huacai. If they kept burning and Didi didn't, Didi would lose. The reason he had to say it, the money was gone again. The board discussed what to do. If Didi didn't subsidize, the winner would take all. Kuaidi would kill them. Tencent said, fine, Didi, keep following. Whether it's tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year, as long as you subsidize, Tencent will subsidize with you 1-to-1. Whatever you put in, we match. Tencent would bear 50% of the subsidy. So the fight continued. And Tencent really did spend the money, roughly more than 1 billion RMB. For Tencent, was this just throwing money away? Not really. The retention was very good. On an average basis, the cost of acquiring a new WeChat payment account and bank card binding was in the teens of 1 billion RMB. That was extremely cheap for Tencent. For just a dozen yuan, it could get people to use its financial services. WeChat Pay's retention was extremely high, and there were few substitutes. Again, unlike the Yuanbao red envelopes.
You really have a grudge against that.
It polluted so many of my group chats. Anyway, on February 17, 2014, Didi announced again, its third announcement, that passenger and driver rewards would return to RMB 10. We're back. Kuaidi and Alipay didn't wait this time. That very afternoon, they announced that Kuaidi's rewards would always be 1 yuan more than Didi's. Whatever Didi changed, Kuaidi would adjust on the spot. It was like kids fighting. My attack power is 180. Mine is 181. Mine is 180. Then I counter. Then Ponyma gave an internal suggestion. Maybe the subsidies should be random instead of fixed. Fixed subsidies are too expensive. Tencent, of course, understands gacha-style mechanics. If subsidies are random, how can the other side always be exactly 1 yuan more? So Didi offered random subsidies for 10,000 orders per day between RMB 12 and RMB 20. Alipay said, we'll subsidize 10,001 orders between RMB 13 and RMB 20. Always a bit more. Strictly speaking, if Didi went up to 20, Kuaidi should have gone 13 to 21. But the point was, always more. The battle became brutal. On heavy days, the two sides burned more than RMB 10 million a day. I remember it vividly. For a long period, I commuted without spending money. That was around 2013, when Xiaolei was in his final year of graduate school and I was already working in Wangjing. My taxi ride wasn't far, just a dozen yuan or so, and with subsidies it was basically free. The subsidy war continued until May 16, 2014. After several months, both sides were nearly out of ammunition. Each of the two companies spent around RMB 1 billion, not counting what Alibaba and Tencent separately put in. Each side, broadly speaking, was at the billion yuan level. During this subsidy war, Didi did several important things. First, Cheng Wei himself evolved. He had been a sales manager, but now he was building a large company, a mobility company.
His experience level rose rapidly. Second, many early Didi employees were trained in the war. Product quality improved sharply. Third, a key event brought in a key figure. In June 2014, a Goldman Sachs Asia managing director came to talk to Cheng Wei about investment. Goldman wanted to invest. It was already the third time she had come, 3 visits to Didi, and Cheng Wei still didn't agree. No exact reason is given. In any case, the Goldman person got annoyed. I'm so optimistic about you, so sincere, coming to you again and again, and you won't let me invest? Then the punchline changed. If you won't let me invest, why don't I join you? Cheng Wei said, that could work. Come join us. That person was Liu Qing, better known internationally as Jen Liu. Born in 1978, she graduated from Peking University in computer science, studied at Harvard, joined Goldman Sachs, and was extremely capable. In 2012, she was promoted to Managing Director for Asia, one of the youngest people globally at that level. Her resume halo was dazzling. People also frequently mention that her father is Liu Chuanzi, founder of Lenovo. At the time, Jen Liu hesitated. I was joking, but joining might actually be okay. Let me ask my father. Her father's advice was simple. Get to know Cheng Wei deeply. He will be the key future partner. Understand him. Jen Liu wanted the opportunity. She wanted to do real operations and prove herself. Being at Goldman was one thing, but directly participating in China's internet startup wave was more interesting. Cheng Wei, in turn, needed the investment banking and capital markets perspective that Jen Liu brought. His own style was more grounded, more grassroots, more mud on the boots. The subsidy war continued until May 16, 2014. After several months, both sides were nearly out of ammunition. Each of the two companies spent around RMB 1 billion, not counting what Alibaba and Tencent separately put in. Each side, broadly speaking, was at the billion yuan level. During this subsidy war, Didi did several important things. First, Cheng Wei himself evolved. He had been a sales manager, but now he was building a large company, a mobility company. In December 2014, Didi completed a Series D, raising $700 million. Soon, Kuaidi announced it had raised $800 million. Always one more 100 million. That one more was no longer a joke. After the Didi-Kuaidi money-burning war, one issue sat clearly on the table. Both sides knew they had to merge. If they kept burning money, it would no longer expand the market. In the beginning, burning subsidies was competition, but they also enlarged the whole pie by bringing in riders and drivers. By then, however, the people who could be attracted had mostly been attracted. If the two sides kept burning, they would just become two fools. They couldn't keep going. Investors especially believed a merger was necessary, otherwise the war would never end. After multiple forces got involved, one important player was reluctant, Alibaba. You can guess why. Alibaba always wants control. It could still exercise some control over Kuaidi, but after a merger, it would have to sit on a board with Tencent. How does that work? For Alibaba, merely holding a stake can feel like holding nothing. It doesn't want passive participation. It wants to absorb the business.
Its organizational culture is relatively closed. We discussed that in the Alibaba episode. When we talked about Meituan, Wang Xing also mentioned that Alibaba later regretted agreeing to this decision. At a key moment, a piece of news appeared at just the right time and forced Alibaba to decide quickly. Didi was already talking with Yi Dao about a merger. Yi Dao Yongche was a true old-timer. How old? Founded in 2010. It was not only one of China's earliest ride-hailing platforms, it may have been one of the world's earliest. In 2010, reportedly in 2014, Yi Dao had 80% market share, though that claim may reflect a much smaller market before the subsidy war took off.
Liu Qing wanted the opportunity. She wanted to do real operations and prove herself. Being at Goldman was one thing, but directly participating in China's internet startup wave was more interesting. Cheng Wei, in turn, needed the investment banking and capital markets perspective that Liu Qing brought. His own style was more grounded, more grassroots, more mud on the boots.
They should have talked in a bathhouse while soaking.
Still a woman involved, so that might not have been convenient. The people included Didi's Cheng Wei and Liu Qing, Kuaidi's Lü Chuanwei, Bao Fan, chairman and CEO of China Renaissance, one of Bao Fan's partners, and Xu Chuansheng, managing partner of Matrix Partners China. These were key industry figures representing different interests. During the negotiations, they sometimes had to step out and make calls. Cheng Wei might call Ma Huateng, Lü Chuanwei had to call Cheng Weixing and Ma Yun. After those calls, on February 14, 2015, Valentine's Day, Didi and Kuaidi announced a full share swap merger. The new company will implement a dual CEO system. Cheng Wei, CEO of Didi Dache, and Lü Chuanwei, CEO of Kuaidi Dache, would serve as co-CEOs of Didi-Kuaidi. Liu Qing would serve as president. Of course, one mountain cannot hold two tigers, meaning two leaders cannot comfortably share the same seat of power. Only a month later, Lü Chuanwei announced that he would sell shares, leave management, and completely exit the ride-hailing stage. According to some media accounts I checked, this was actually settled during that negotiation day. It couldn't have been a real one-month trial to see who would win inside the company. That would be impossible. It must have been arranged in advance. Everyone had that understanding. Also, when people mention Kuaidi, they often focus on Cheng Weixing. But in Kuaidi's early development, Lü Chuanwei's role was even more important. That distinction between founder and operator is worth noting. For younger listeners, Kuaidi is unfamiliar because the brand disappeared long ago. After the merger, the company was for a time called Didi-Kuaidi, but later the name reverted to Didi. The subsidy war was also extremely important for Tencent. It had two major effects. First, WeChat Pay. We've talked about this before. WeChat's Spring Festival digital red envelopes were one major driver. But besides that, and unlike the later Yuanbao red envelopes that mostly spammed group chats, the biggest contributor was Didi. The RMB 1 billion subsidy we mentioned earlier brought tens of millions of users into WeChat Pay. The earliest massive wave of users flowed into WeChat Pay through Didi. Second, when Didi's order volume exploded, Cheng Wei discovered that the servers couldn't handle it. He called Ma Huateng, Pony Ma, in the middle of the night. Ma Huateng mobilized resources and sent people to support Didi. That night, more than 1,000 servers were ready. This was one of Tencent Cloud's most important battles. At first, Tencent Cloud was mostly for internal use. After this battle, Tencent Cloud proved it could handle large-scale data, heavy traffic, and cloud support for companies outside Tencent.
In other words, it started to look like a real cloud platform, not just an internal Tencent tool. This also adds another perspective to what we said in the Alibaba episode. Ma Huateng at first may not have been especially convinced about cloud services. Didi helped change that. The Didi-Kuaidi subsidy war had another effect. A large number of ride-hailing platforms disappeared. It wasn't simply Didi and Kuaidi in the early days. There were many platforms. But once the subsidy war started, many of them were crushed. We already mentioned Yaoyao Zhaoche disappearing after the subsidy war. Shanghai had a strong local ride-hailing app called Da Huangfeng, literally Bumblebee, founded by Li Yong, former chief financial officer of Tudou. It launched in March 2013, and within a month, it had more than 10,000 drivers. Soon, it covered about 20% of Shanghai taxis and had about 10,000 daily orders. It received several $1 million from Morningside. Unfortunately, it did not raise enough capital in advance. Once the two giants had, Alibaba and Tencent, there was no way out for Da Hongfeng. In November 2013, Da Hongfeng was acquired by Kuaidi and merged into it. It was later renamed 一号专车, another premium car service, literally number one private car.
Some listeners may still remember it. You could get it in Kuaidi, and after Kuaidi merged into Didi, you could still get number one private car for a while. Later, the brand gradually disappeared. In the early days, number one private car competed directly with Yidao for a long time. Another platform was 包米大车, literally 100-meter taxi, meaning you could hail a car within 100 meters. It launched in 2012 as a taxi platform. 包米 did research and found that more than 90% of taxi drivers did not have smartphones, so it decided to build hardware, custom devices, a combined software and hardware model. That worked somewhat in the beginning, but within a year, smartphones became widespread.
That makes sense. In my first job, I also encountered projects that gave hardware devices to drivers, something like an in-car radio with location capability. That could be used to monitor real-time traffic conditions, basically what AutoNavi or Baidu Maps do today. Once enough people are using phones, the road condition map can be reconstructed. But the mobile era arrived before those dedicated hardware systems could really spread. Every phone became a device that could do all of that work.
Let's also mention Chen Weixing. He made many early investments. He invested in Zhang Yiming's Series A. We said before that Zhang Yiming wanted a lot of money in their round, and many investors wouldn't give it. Chen Weixing did. Who knows how many times that investment has multiplied. Later, Chen became more famous for his deep involvement in the cryptocurrency market. He invested in Binance and Zhao Changpeng at the Angel Round. Angel Round. Zhao Changpeng is another legendary figure and was once called the richest Chinese person. Zhang Yiming has also been called China's richest person. So Chen Weixing is often described as the man who invested in two richest men. What an eye. So after Didi and Kuaidi merged, could Didi finally relax? Of course not. In fact, one reason they merged was that a new enemy was coming. Now the Kuomintang and the communists had to cooperate because a foreign enemy was arriving. War never sleeps. We enter Act 3, third battle. Every act is a battle. Act 3, third battle. After Didi Dache received $100 million in its D1 round from DST Global, the investment firm founded by Yuri Milner, another old acquaintance of ours, we said Zhang Yiming depended on his life-saving money, money that kept the company alive. Milner came to Didi and spoke with Cheng Wei. Yuri, who was also Zhou Shouzi's former boss, said three things. First, Uber is going to destroy you. Second, if you want to survive, there is only one way. Merge with Kuaidi immediately. Third, after you merge, I will give you $1 billion.
Very concise.
Every sentence hits the pain point. The route was planned. Just go. DST and Yuri's operation also had a clever move behind it. After investing in Didi, they called Tiger Global, another major investment firm, and said, "We invested in Didi." After hanging up, Tiger Global turned around and invested in Kuaidi. Once the two sides' valuations were pushed up separately, they could merge. Kind of deal-making is interesting. Back to Uber. We covered Uber a long time ago, in episode 93. Uber's boss, 特拉维斯卡兰尼克, was a business maniac, the kind of person who liked to fight with overwhelming force. It's very rare for the founder of a foreign company entering China to personally command the battle. When Microsoft was in China, we didn't see Bill Gates putting on armor and leading charges every day. When Google was in China, the founders barely came. This was one reason people often talked about decision chains and localization problems. But during Uber's war with Didi, Kalanick physically spent at least half his time in China. He commanded personally. It is said that before the full war began, Kalanick came to Cheng Wei and said he could invest in Didi. Cheng Wei was willing to give up only a few percentage points. He didn't want to hand over control. Kalanick said the minimum threshold was 40%.
Forget it.
Exactly. The gap was too large. The two sides went to war. Uber's start in China was also in 2014, which we can count as the first real year of ride-hailing in China. The three players, Didi, Kuaidi, and Uber, all began doing well in China around 2014. At the end of 2014, Uber received a $600 million investment from Baidu, plus support from its global headquarters, so it had plenty of ammunition. We mentioned in the Baidu episode that Baidu also participated in the ride-hailing war, but it supported a third party. Uber adopted the Chinese name Youbu, roughly a better mobility platform. It cooperated with Alipay. Its first small team landed in Jing'an District, Shanghai. At the beginning, it also negotiated with rental companies because, as we said, its model was premium private cars. It negotiated directly with rental companies for drivers and vehicles. On the consumer side, Uber was an international company, and starting in Shanghai gave it a more stylish, higher-end feel. It sponsored Shanghai Fashion Week, the kind of thing Didi and Kuaidi wouldn't sponsor. The product interface looked much more elegant than Didi or Kuaidi, cleaner design, fewer messy elements, a more premium feel. The app didn't ask users to think too much. It appealed to business people and white-collar workers in big cities. Uber's marketing activities also left a deep impression. Once, after heavy rain in Shanghai, Uber changed the car icons in the app to boats and jokingly renamed the feature Uber Boat.
Microsoft and Google had now succeeded. Why would Uber? Later, people found Uber's combat tower was truly strong, which had a lot to do with Kalanick's personal style. At first, Uber promoted Uber Black, a premium private car service. At that time, it did not directly compete with Didi. The main competitors were Shenzhou and Yidao.
Shenzhou was similar to Yidao, and Shenzhou car rental later triggered a well-known controversy. It launched a set of Beat You posters. The U was the letter U, Uber's initial. It couldn't name Uber directly, so it said Beat You, meaning beat you, and attacked black private cars. Since Uber had Uber Black, calling it black private cars was obviously targeting Uber. What did the campaign accuse black cars of doing? It said they leaked privacy and were unsafe. One poster with actor Wu Xiubo said something like, "Black private cars know my phone number and home address. They spy on me and my family." Shenzhou private car claimed to be safe, harassment-free, no private cars, no privacy leaks. The focus was privacy. It is true that many of Uber's cars at the time lacked operating licenses and were in a gray area. But Shenzhou's advertising directly equated lack of license with spying on your family and being unsafe. That was over the top.
Right. It repackaged non-compliance into, therefore, they must be spying on your privacy.
After the posters came out, controversy was huge. Most people disliked them and supported Uber. People felt Shenzhou had gone too far, that this was not a fair or respectable way to compete. Some people even criticized celebrities like Wu Xiubo and Hai Qing for appearing in the ads. Why was Shenzhou so wild? Because its founder was wild. Shenzhou Car Rental's founder and boss, Lu Zhengyao, had a consistent style. After Shenzhou listed, Lu Zhengyao led the creation of Luckin Coffee. After Luckin was delisted for financial fraud, he exited and founded Coty Coffee.
The fight never stops.
Exactly. Another business maniac. We should talk about him in the future. He's too famous and too strange not to. Back to Shenzhou and Uber. When Shenzhou fought Uber, Didi and Kuaidi had just finished their own fight. At first, there wasn't much direct competition. Didi and Kuaidi were mainly fighting in taxis, perhaps with some private cars in the middle, but mainly taxis. Shenzhou and Uber Black were both working with rental car companies, with Shenzhou being more compliant. The turning point came in 2015 when Uber launched People's Uber in China. The name was good, People's Uber. For Chinese users, that felt different, the People's Uber. People's Uber was completely different from Uber Black. It was a true sharing platform. As long as people and cars met certain conditions, private cars could run orders. Uber had figured out the Chinese market. People's Uber was cheap, mainly because the supply was cheap. It didn't have the cost of taxi companies or rental car companies. Everyone could join relatively easily. For part-time drivers, they didn't necessarily need a high fixed monthly income. If they could go out and get orders, that was enough. In many places, once People's Uber launched, its price was sometimes only half that of a taxi. Compared with subsidies, this was even more aggressive because it looked like lasting savings. In 1 month, it swept the market and reached 1 million orders. Earlier, Didi's peak after burning so much money was 5 million. People's Uber reached 1/5 of that in a month. Didi and Kuaidi felt real pressure. They had actually prepared related express ride products, but didn't dare launch them widely. Why? Because their base was taxi drivers. From then on, the fight became close quarters combat. Fighting Kuaidi made Didi grow. Fighting Uber made it grow even more. There's another interesting anecdote from this period. According to Fortune magazine, Cheng Wei was anxious. What do? We just finished fighting Kuaidi, and now Uber is here. Can we beat Uber? He went to ask seniors for advice. He had many around him. First, he asked Liu Qing's father, Liu Chuanzhi. Liu said, "You must use local advantages, fight a guerrilla war, and drag them down." Cheng Wei said, "Okay, but how exactly?" Then he asked Ma Huateng. Ma Huateng said,
line up information and annihilate them head on. Different plan. So he asked Ma Yun. Ma Yun said, imperialism is a paper tiger, meaning the opponent looks frightening but is weaker than it appears. Drag them out for 2 years and they will have problems on their own. 3 answers, all different. Cheng Wei reportedly looked confused. Strategically, none of those lines is wrong, but how do you execute? Still no answer. You still have to figure it out yourself. Let's talk about the details. One of the biggest problems Didi had to solve, and one of the long-term headaches for all ride-hailing platforms, was supply-demand imbalance. Imagine we have an event, a chat with listeners, or coffee, and it's far away. When it ends at night, 30 plus people all take cars to 30 plus destinations. Suddenly, that area loses 30 plus units of supply.
Besides quantity and inventory characteristics, ride-hailing supply has geographic distribution characteristics, and that constraint is huge. Early Didi, like Kuaidi, allowed passengers to add money to get a car. But once the platform grew and supply-demand imbalance became severe, mock-ups created a problem. Sometimes they had to be very high. A ride originally costing a dozen yuan might need an extra 20 or 30 yuan, even 10 times more. Passengers will complain. It's like stores raising prices during disasters. It's easy to label the company as an exploitative company. Whether prices should rise during disasters is a complex economics question, not something to dismiss in one line. Didi's dynamic pricing is similar. The original intention was understandable. If drivers don't want to come back, a passenger paying more might attract them. But when imbalance becomes too severe, it causes trouble. Passengers can't accept it. So how do you regulate supply? Didi had to find other ways. After many complaints, Didi focused on 2 solutions. First, it adjusted drivers' income structure. Instead of pure order income, drivers' income became order income plus rewards. Why have rewards? Essentially, some of the old markup fees became platform-issued incentives. The platform could use prediction to decide where and when to pay them. For example, rush order bonuses or other conditional subsidies, like workplace KPIs. If the platform found Wang Jing or Xie Qi short on supply, it could set rewards there and attract drivers to take orders in that area. The platform had to take money first and then redistribute it to drivers. Drivers would then complain to passengers, and this became hard for the platform to manage. Also, rush order rewards were unfriendly to drivers who didn't take orders full time or didn't want to work extremely hard. Their earnings could drop sharply. That was the first solution, somewhat better than before. The second solution was more important. Didi naturally discovered that at certain times, some cars had empty seats. Using those empty seats could be more efficient than bringing in more cars, because too many cars would create congestion. Many of those empty seats were in private cars. It was natural to think, can we use those private cars? During the commute, can people from nearby companies with cars pick someone up along the way? That was Didi's thinking. Soon after, on June 1st, 2015, Didi Hitch, Didi Shunfeng Che, launched. This was true sharing economy. Logically and in terms of original motivation, it really did save social resources. It greatly helped solve supply-demand imbalance, which varies by time and space. Suppose a city normally needs 50,000 units of supply, but during commuting peaks, it needs 80,000. Suddenly, the need jumps to 80,000. How many drivers should the city recruit? Recruit 50,000 and you can't handle peaks. Recruit 80,000 and you waste supply most of the day. With Hitch and other part-time supply, at peak times, you can suddenly have thousands or even tens of thousands of additional supply units. Once the peak passes, that supply naturally exits. For supply-demand balance, this is almost perfect. Solving supply-demand balance was a long-term internal product, R&D, and operations problem at Didi. It was also the problem I spent the most time studying when I worked there.
I worked on businesses similar to discounted express rides and part-time drivers. Other teams worked on carpooling. When we found projects that could solve these problems, it was genuinely fulfilling. Through product and technology, you saved social resources, the platform matched more orders, and both passengers and drivers had better experiences. It was a 3-way win and created social value.
Let me ask, how did Discount Express actually work?
There were many methods. For example, one was to let passengers accept longer waiting times. The passenger gives up some immediacy. I can place an order earlier, maybe half an hour or 10 minutes ahead, and I'm willing to wait, but I want a lower price. That gives drivers and the platform more room to plan. When passengers and drivers each give up some experience, the platform gains pricing flexibility and can match different scenarios. On the driver's side, the same driver might not want to run far. I want to operate in this area. I don't want to go too far because it's troublesome to get home. You can set conditions for that driver, but the order price may be lower and some of the benefit goes to passengers. Passengers also give up some experience. In the end, the platform can match different kinds of supply and demand. People who originally didn't want to take an order or hail a ride may now be willing to do so because their particular needs are met. Back to Hitch. Once it launched, the effect was excellent. In 1 month, 1 million car owners joined. In 3 months, 5.5 million car owners joined. After 3 months, 5% of China's private car owners had become Hitch car owners. 3 months! Didi kept launching new services. Besides Hitch, it launched buses. At one point there were bus services, later minibus services. Xiaolei has taken those minibuses. They were a bit like carpooling, but with designated stops. You gave up more convenience. For example, when ordering from a station, you might select all the discounted options, and several times I ended up in a minibus. Everyone got on and wondered, why are we pooled like this? The driver said, you selected it yourselves. You give up more experience, maybe walk farther to a stop, and the order becomes cheaper.
Not a lot cheaper, but cheaper. Didi was constantly exploring different models. If users gave up some experience, that had value. Drivers might stop less or avoid detours. Routes might be smoother. During these explorations, express rides accelerated subsidies against People's Uber. People's Uber responded quickly with its own completion bonuses. Those bonuses were extreme. If a People's Uber driver completed 80 orders in a week, a very low standard at the time, Uber gave an extra RMB 7,000 in 1 week. That meant a large number of drivers could suddenly earn an extra RMB 28,000 a month. The attraction was obvious. During this battle, both Didi and Uber leveled up again. It was like playing a game, experience points pouring in, knowledge rushing into the brain, evolving again and again. Order dispatch algorithms, dynamic pricing systems, service management, product and operations capabilities, all improved tremendously. Once you get through a war, the experience and capability trained inside the company are completely different. During this period, Didi also made a strategic partnership as part of the fight against Uber. It invested $100 million in Lyft, cooperating directly with Uber's rival in the United States. You hit me in China, can't I hit you at home? At the same time, Didi announced loudly that it had raised $3 billion, the financing round led by Zhu Xiaohu that we mentioned earlier. Didi also reported that in China, 99% of taxi hailing requests and 80% of private car ride requests made by mobile phone were fulfilled with its help, equivalent to 3 million ride services per day. That meant it had effectively monopolized taxis, and in private cars, it already had 80% market share. Didi burned money fiercely again.
Uber's incentives were huge, and while I didn't find Didi's specific details, they probably were not much smaller. In June 2016, Didi's Series F raised $4.5 billion. Apple even invested, and Apple rarely invests in companies like that. Uber didn't back down. It raised $3.5 billion from Saudi Arabia. Media compiled many rounds of financing for Didi-Kuaidi, Uber Global, and Uber China. The amounts got larger and larger. Uber Global Series G in June 2016 was $6 billion. Uber China Series B in January 2016 was $2 billion. Didi-Kuaidi's Series F in June 2016 was $4.5 billion. And in February, there had been another $1 billion F round. From 2015 to 2016, after the merger, the two sides raised more than $8 billion combined. And that's dollars. According to leaked Uber financial documents, Uber expected to invest $3 billion in China from 2015 to 2017. Uber lost $1.1 billion in China in 2015 and expected to lose about $900 million in both 2016 and 2017, with profit only arriving in 2018, projected at $100 million. So it was continuous burning and losses. According to Tencent Tech, Didi lost at least $10 billion in 2015 alone. Zhu Xiaohu, one of Didi's main investors, put it directly. He said, the first Gulf War cost $60 billion. Didi and Uber together has raised $20 billion. This was a real war, a proper one. But after reaching $30 billion, the war might have to stop. Zhu Xiaohu turned out to be right, and the end came even earlier. While both sides were raising money and subsidizing aggressively, many passengers and drivers thought, great, keep burning, keep burning. For passengers, the sudden bad news came. The two sides were going to merge.
Many listeners probably remember using Didi Premier back then. Later, the team gradually integrated and many executives left. After Didi and Kuaidi merged, Kuaidi had also been in charge of the taxi business for a period, while Didi focused much of its energy on express rides. There were stage-specific arrangements like that. We haven't mentioned the senior vice president of Uber China, though we briefly discussed her in the earlier Uber episode. That was Liu Zhen, known as Uber China's big sister. She is Liu Chuanzhi's niece, which makes her Liu Qing's cousin. Media loved that story. Liu Qing was number 2 at Didi, Liu Zhen was a senior executive at Uber, and the two sides were directly competing. The two even exchanged public barbs in the media. Liu Qing said Uber was too inefficient and would lose. Liu Zhen said, just wait, our orders will soon surpass theirs.
And then at Lunar New Year dinner, they might still sit at the same table.
Later media reports said they didn't talk much about work at home, which is reasonable. It also wouldn't be very compliant to discuss company details. After Didi acquired Uber China, Liu Zhen left Uber China and joined another TMD company, Toutiao, the news and content platform also known as Jinri Toutiao, becoming a vice president there. She worked there for several years and later, after leaving in 2020, joined Genki Forest. Always at top companies. Do not imitate any nationality, region, language, or quoted speaker. The Uber China merger happened just as the bike-sharing boom began. Uber China's Iron Triangle setup and war experience against Didi created a highly capable team. It was called a kind of Wampo military academy for that era. Uber China ended up feeding half the bike-sharing industry. Mobike's CEO Wang Xiaofeng was Uber Shanghai's general manager. Mobike's product vice president came from Uber China. Its product development vice president came from Uber China's development team. Its design director came from Uber China. Its mobile lead also came from Uber China. Luo Gang, Uber China's southern region general manager, later became vice president of Mobai and joined Jidu Auto in 2021. Guo Qing, an operations vice president at Oppo, also came from Uber China. Another famous one is Wang Ying, Uber China's central region general manager, who founded Realts, a well-known consumer brand. There are many others. Uber China really did produce talent. Didi beat 一号专车, beat Kuaidi, beat Uber. After years of fighting, could it finally rest and enjoy ruling the world? Not yet. Before we move to the next act, we'll continue the usual pattern and discuss the impact of this war. This war also killed many small platforms. In Hitch, Didi was a true traffic black hole. 3 months after Didi Hitch launched, it had 66% market share. How do you survive against that? Dida Pinche, another carpooling service founded in 2014, came from the old group buying site Dida Tuan, founded by Song Zhongjie. When Dida Tuan stopped, he moved into carpooling. The same year, Li Huabing founded 50 Ying Yongche, another ride-hailing service. Back then, names like 51-something were popular. I want something style. He had previously founded Haha Pinche, another carpooling app. Later, 50 Ying Yongche received investment from Leijun, Innovation Works, and Sequoia, a very strong group. There was also Tian Tian Yongche, another ride-hailing app founded by former Meituan entrepreneur Zhai Guanglong with money from Baidu and Sequoia. And Ai Pinche, another carpooling app founded in 2013, which failed to raise money and closed in 2015.
People often think express rides led taxis and premium cars, but actually, taxis and premium cars both existed before express rides. After the Uber war, several premium car players were affected. First, Shenzhou Zuche. Shenzhou listed in 2014 at its best moment. After later rounds of competition, its orders were squeezed. The company still exists, though it was privatized and delisted in 2021. We'll talk about the strange figure Lu Zhengyao another time. Yidao is the most unfortunate. Its early product experience and operations were actually quite stable. Zhou Hang later reflected that its failure began in 2014, when he felt cash flow was still okay and didn't join the money-burning war. Again, there is no universal truth. Sometimes solid product work is enough. Sometimes in a competitive environment, strategic mistakes are fatal. Zhou Hang also recalled that Cheng Wei approached him about a merger, but clearly without sincerity. It was mainly to pressure Alibaba. Yi Dao's own financing ability couldn't match Didi's. Cheng Wei had found Liu Qing, but Yi Dao didn't have someone like that. Later, it suffered. What happened to Yi Dao? In October 2015, when the war with Uber was already nearing its end, a company injected capital into the declining Yi Dao and acquired 70% of its shares. Which company? Le-Eco, the debt-laden tech conglomerate. It basically bought Yi Dao outright. In 2015, Le-Eco's market capitalization was 160 billion RMB dollars, equivalent to 9 Sohus or 6 Youkus.
You have to think of Le-Eco's style. Many of its businesses were like pass the parcel. If you stop now, you are the one holding the parcel. You must wait until someone else takes it. Then, Zhou Hang discovered serious problems. First, Le-Eco said it would invest tens of billions, but only 1 or 200 million actually arrived. Worse, one day, Zhou Hang found that Le-Eco had used Yi Dao itself as the borrower to take RMB 1.4 billion in bank loans without him knowing.
What?
Later, Zhou Hang fought with them and couldn't sort it out. Finally, he broke publicly and wrote an open letter in 2017 accusing Le-Eco of misappropriating RMB 1.3 billion of Yi Dao's funds and causing Yi Dao's capital chain to break. On April 20th, 2017, Yi Dao's 3 co-founders, Zhou Hang, Yang Yun, and Tang Peng, issued a joint statement resigning from all Yi Dao positions. By 2019, Yi Dao users found they couldn't withdraw their balances, and this time they really couldn't. A run began. By 2022, the app couldn't even be logged into. A pioneer simply faded away, and now not many people mention it. Maybe the run premium car model, working with rental companies and having organized drivers and fleets, later attracted many new players. These are often called OEM players, meaning automaker-backed services. 寿骑's 首汽约车 service, Geely's 曹操出行 service, T3 出行 from Chinese automakers FAW, Dongfeng, and Chang'an, SAIC's 想到出行 service, and GAC's although 直出行 service. You can think of them as platforms using their own vehicle supply to build B2C services. The cars are theirs, so they can operate in a B2C way. Their scale can't become huge nationwide, but regionally they can be significant. 寿骑 in the north, Cao Cao around Hangzhou, T3 in parts of southern China, and so on. When you mention these platforms, you realize that if each has its own app and asks consumers to use it separately, that's unrealistic. They need a platform. This is the hardest battle. Didi had already gone through many twists. Bad products, lack of money, money burning, operations problems. It was never smooth from the start. It hit one wall after another. From the survival rate of the ride-hailing industry, making it this far was already very hard. Not 1%, perhaps 5%, but still low. The next opponent was Meituan, which we mentioned in the Meituan episode. The background to Cheng Wei's line, if you want war, then war. Meituan suddenly launched Meituan Taxi. That same day, Cheng Wei and Wang Xing had been chatting amiably. That evening, Meituan Taxi went online. Cheng Wei asked, "Why did you launch?" Wang Xing replied, "Just testing, just trying." Didi felt awful. It had just finished one battle, and here came another. But to be honest, Meituan was more of a probe. It didn't later cause Didi substantial damage. In 2018, Douyin had just begun to gain traction, and Meituan was not yet as robust as it later became. Its cash flow could not support a full subsidy war with Didi. At that time, Didi was still the big brother among TMD, in full momentum.
Wait, what do you mean Douyin had just begun to gain traction?
One factor is distance. Another is remoteness. The risk is much higher than ordinary express rides. Whether the driver is professional is not the main factor. Social interaction may matter somewhat, but the core problem is a long-distance order scenario. On top of that, the customer service system clearly had problems. When police call and ask, you should cooperate. There's no real defense for that. The platform rules were unreasonable. That is why I say Didi's fourth battle had no external enemy. Didi's enemy was itself. If it won that battle, it could continue. If it lost, like earlier battles, it would be gone. The impact on Didi was huge.
I was working at the company then. We were in meetings and suddenly all the bosses disappeared. Meetings were reorganized, reviews and discussions began. I wasn't in the hitch business, nor in service governance or customer service, but everyone around me was shocked. How could something like this happen? What exactly had gone wrong? What was wrong with the system? My personal observation was that internal executives and colleagues were shocked and deeply upset. It wasn't that everyone thought, "Oh, we always knew this would happen." People did not know. They were genuinely stunned. According to media reports, at an executive meeting, Product Vice President Yu Jun criticized the company, saying it had become a company controlled by capital and no longer cared about life. Cheng Wei later sent an internal letter saying that competitiveness had overshadowed the original mission, and the model of wild running had planted hidden risks long ago. That goes back to the previous 3 wars. The company atmosphere had been shaped by constant combat. But mobility is social infrastructure. It involves travel and safety.
If you run it purely with an internet technology platform or operations platform mindset, the focus inevitably drifts. Afterward, Didi carried out a large-scale internal cleanup. I remember that all company KPIs were stopped. Everything had to be reviewed and resorted. In September 2018, 10 ministries entered Didi for investigation and regulatory review. Not only Didi, other platforms also had similar loopholes.
收奇、神州、草草、易刀、美团、滴大、高德
All were approached, interviewed, and investigated in a joint special study of ride-hailing safety and service issues. For Didi, this was a necessary reflection. It's a bit like Zhang Yiming's line that algorithms have no values. But when you are a platform, you cannot have no values. You are affecting the entire public. In the early days, Didi designed products and platforms with engineering thinking and operations thinking. It didn't fully see safety as the platform's core responsibility. For example, if a taxi driver kills someone, does the taxi company bear responsibility? In the absence of company negligence, usually not. But for a two-sided platform, matching is the core concept. If you match people, you must be responsible for the experience. This is a core issue of institutional design and execution. Large consumer platforms like Taobao, Didi, Douyin, Xiaohongshu, Meituan Delivery, and Xianyu, e-commerce, short video, local services, and resale platforms all are like this. In the earliest days, if you bought a fake product on Taobao, you might say, the seller cheated me. But today, we naturally think the platform must manage it. If the platform doesn't manage it, why would I keep buying there? During Didi's regulatory cleanup period, commercial competitors did not relax. Gaode entered the market in a high-profile way, connecting to a large number of OEM platforms and supporting many small local platforms. You can see this in many places. There are many ride-hailing providers whose names you don't recognize.
The supply-demand matching we talked about earlier, letting private car owners share seats in express rides, became nearly impossible.
In the early days, express rides had many private car owners and part-time drivers. Later, with certificate requirements, that changed. This had a big impact on my own career because, as I said, my work in the express ride business focused on part-time drivers. For large platforms, it is very hard to bypass regulation. Smaller platforms may find other ways to be compliant. In these years, Didi also did several other things. One was overseas expansion. It tried operating in Taiwan but exited because of local regulatory requirements. In early 2018, it acquired 99, Brazil's largest ride-hailing platform, and began internationalization. Didi's largest and most successful overseas market is South America. In Brazil, its latest market share is around 40%. In September 2025, Cheng Wei even went to Brazil to meet the president, which shows the Brazilian government's attention to Didi's business there. Based on its South American mobility business, Didi also did food delivery. It also invested in Grab in Southeast Asia and Ola in India, and participated in various investment businesses. It had businesses in Japan and Russia too, though we won't expand on them. Many of these international businesses are still exploratory. You can't say they've done badly, but they are not dazzling in the way Temu or TikTok's global expansion has been. The core issue, which we also mentioned when discussing ByteDance, is that you can't serve the whole world with one system. Didi clearly cannot. In each local market, how do you work with drivers? How do you do operations? How do you manage passengers?
The logic is completely different, so marginal costs don't fall easily. Liu Zhen, back when she was at Uber China, once made a comment criticizing Didi's globalization. Her general point was, if Didi relies on investments for globalization, that will not be easy.
If you are an investment company, you can invest a bit in American companies, Southeast Asian companies, Indian companies. But as a product-oriented technology company, I don't think investment equals global operations. She did not see that as real globalization. She saw it as investing. Another direction was lower-tier markets. Didi created Huaxiaozhu, a lower-tier market ride-hailing service. Some listeners may not know that Huaxiaozhu belongs to Didi. When it first came out, it had quite a lot of momentum. Over time, people may have lost that association. At first, there were gray areas, including some black cars, but later it was brought into Didi's overall licensing and regulatory system. On the user side, it used viral growth tactics similar to Pinduoduo. Prices were fixed price, and the matching logic was somewhat different. Today, it is still an important business and is connected to Gaode maps. You can get Huaxiaozhu through Gaode. Didi also participated in bike sharing. At first, it made investments, then launched its own bike sharing brand, Qingju Danche, literally Qingju Bikes, in early 2018. We will probably talk about bike sharing in a future episode. Didi later also did car rental and tried car manufacturing. On car manufacturing, it cooperated with BYD, the Chinese automaker, to make the D1 ride-hailing vehicle. The D1 did not turn out as ideal as hoped. Speaking of Lixiang and ideal, Didi had wanted to invest in Li Auto very early and had cooperated with Li Xiang's car company. My personal sense is that Cheng Wei has more of a Jianghu style, valuing relationships and loyalty. We're so close. You take Wang Xing's money? His relationship with Wang Xing became bad for a while. After Li Xiang took Wang Xing's money, Cheng Wei exited completely. Didi had originally had a stake there, so it was a pity. Didi and Li Auto could have been an ideal combination. Didi was in mobility and had natural advantages in vehicles. Didi also entered community group buying with Chengxin Youxuan. I think I mentioned before that I worked at Chengxin Youxuan too. We'll save Chengxin Youxuan and community group buying for another episode. It's a whole separate story. Some listeners said in the Meituan episode that we missed Meituan's community group buying business. We remembered. We just plan to discuss it later, separately. The Hitch safety crisis was the first heavy blow. The second was even more serious. Do not imitate any nationality, region, language, or quoted speaker. In June 2021, Didi prepared to list on the New York Stock Exchange. On June 30th, Didi successfully listed, with a market value of $68.1 billion. Suddenly, 2 days later, China's cyberspace regulator announced a review of Didi and required it to stop new user registrations. That was already very severe. Stopping new registrations is not a simple 24-hour app removal. On July 4, the regulator announced that the Didi app would be taken down. Not just one app, 25 Didi-related apps were removed. Everything under Didi was pulled, root and branch, for compliance review. Officially, the reason was mainly illegal collection of personal information. But everyone knows the core issue, later also discussed, was the listing.
A year and a half.
That year and a half was also Gaode's comeback moment, which is understandable. Why did Didi's 2021 listing trigger something like this? How could such a large company not have thought it through? How did it stab itself? There were some accidental factors. 2021 was exactly when China-US geopolitical friction was at a severe point. We said TikTok encountered similar problems around that period. Didi listed using a VIE structure, a variable interest entity structure used by many Chinese companies to list overseas, which we've discussed before.
It is not fully legally recognized because the authorities have never explicitly said the structure is allowed. It was originally a way for Chinese companies to list in the United States. In the past, it wasn't a big problem. Didi may have taken for granted that because it had been fined before, it could proceed normally. And then the timing changed. Maybe communication upward was not sufficient. Some media analysis suggested the issue involved data processing activities that could seriously affect national security. Precise map information, user trajectory data, traffic flow information, and even the possibility of inferring major events and decisions from the commuting patterns of important institutions. Information about key national projects, facilities, bases, and enterprises might be exposed. In principle, US market regulators could demand such information from Didi.
If everyone were being polite, perhaps they wouldn't. But with Trump, teacher Trump, in office, or as a factor, it was hard to say. That is a reasonable analytical angle. If the US really reached out for the data and you were listed there, what would you do? As for what really happened, accounts differ.
Let's take stock of today's ride-hailing market and Didi's situation. According to Frost & Sullivan data, based on GTV, gross transaction value, China's ride-hailing market is expected to grow from RMB 358.9 billion in 2025 to RMB 666.16 billion in 2029.
Wait, it can almost double?
A compound annual growth rate of 17%. This has a lot to do with the boom in new energy vehicles. When I go back to my hometown now, getting a ride is very convenient. Car ownership has risen sharply, so ride-hailing will continue to grow. Even though in first-tier cities, the market already feels quite saturated. Based on GTV statistics, in 2024, China's top 5 ride-hailing platforms accounted for 86% of the market. Didi's market share was over 70%. It remains a giant. That year-and-a-half removal from app stores only costed a few points of share, maybe 10 points at most. When Liu Fei first told me this data, I was surprised. I didn't expect that after being unavailable for a year and a half, Didi was not only still alive, but not hurt that badly. It shows how high the entry barrier is. The network effect of a two-sided platform is too strong. Moving passengers and drivers elsewhere is very costly. According to New Fortune magazine's compilation of public data, Didi Chuxing had around 70% market share, Cao Cao 5.4%, T3 5.3%, 手汽约车 2.8%, 想到出行 2.1%. The top 5 together had 86%. Looking at those numbers, the gap is enormous. The first tier is 70%. The second tier is 5%. The third is around 2%, and even between second and third, there's more than a twofold gap. That's 2024 data.
100 million monthly active users. Wow, I didn't expect that.
They may open the app without necessarily getting a ride. As for Didi itself, at its IPO, it had a market value of around $68 billion. During the period when it was the leading company in TMD, it was valued at $56 billion. I remember that $56 billion figure painfully well, because when I joined Didi, my options were calculated based on that valuation. For years at Didi, that $56 billion number didn't change. Always $56 billion. A painful lesson. Today, because Didi delisted, it trades on the pink sheets. Its pink sheet market value is just above $20 billion. Based on recent developments, it may have an opportunity to list again. Why? In early 2026, one of the hottest pieces of news was that the IPO lawsuit that had dragged on for years was nearing resolution. Investors had claimed Didi failed to disclose regulatory risks, causing their losses. The stock fell from $14 to $2. That case has now been settled out of court, so the legal issue in the US has been resolved. Without that lawsuit, and with Didi now growing steadily under regulation and turning profitable, it may later prepare to list in Hong Kong. Autonomous driving is an important future business for Didi. Didi and GAC Aion, GAC's electric vehicle brand, have moved their mass-produced autonomous driving vehicle into large-scale road testing. On January 23, 2026, the first mass-produced R2 vehicle
jointly developed by the two sides, rolled off the line at GAC Ion's factory and was delivered. After all these years, that's where Didi has developed to.
Finally, I want to say a few words about ride-hailing and Didi. I worked at Didi for quite a long time, 3 years of my career. I was in the express ride department working on driver-side product. Looking back, it was one of the best working experiences of my career. Yujun was our teacher. When everyone discussed problems together, the discussion truly started from user value and market value. How to make travel more efficient, more worry-free. We were studying problems that created value. As I mentioned, I worked for a long time on driver-side products related to supply-demand balance. How to get part-time drivers to take orders, how to let passengers pay lower prices, how to match more orders and reduce supply pressure. During my 3 years at Didi, I didn't go home for Chinese New Year in 2 of them because I was working on Spring Festival support projects. See how hardworking I was? I've talked about this on Sangwuhuan and other shows. Sometimes when drivers don't understand you, it feels hard. Of course you understand why they don't understand. But sometimes you also don't understand why they don't understand that you understand why they don't understand. It's hard to align everyone, very hard. If you make even a small strategic adjustment, it affects someone's income. But there was a strong sense of achievement. Later, at other large platforms, the work sometimes felt more like tightening screws, picking at small details, and the experience was less meaningful. You didn't feel like you were really solving problems for many people. So looking back, Didi was a good period for me. Of course, later on, and this is not only about organizational culture, any company that grows large faces more constraints. That is just a personal feeling. From another angle, ride-hailing really shows how the internet and the information age changed daily life. Not just Didi, the whole market. The value is very clear. Years ago, when I was still a student and lacked social experience, traveling to other cities and taking taxis was difficult. You walked out of a station, north or south, and black car drivers would swarm you. You didn't dare randomly get into one. Once you got in, how much would they charge? Where would they take you? They didn't use meters. At that time, there was no WeChat. You couldn't easily report your ride to a friend. There were taxis, but sometimes even taxis wouldn't use the meter. When you arrived, the driver might say, this fee and that fee, taking advantage of outsiders. Sometimes taxis refused rides. Being afraid to ride is one thing. Wanting to ride and not being able to is another. In some hometown places that were rougher, you might get into a taxi, the meter started, and halfway through, the driver began picking up other passengers. Suddenly, 3 more people got in. You'd ask, aren't you taking us? Why are you picking them up? The driver would basically say, we are sharing. What are you going to do about it? When we were young, we were used to things like that. Ride-hailing is much more standardized overall. This time when I went home, I experienced it again. Taking a ride is really convenient. I open the app, get an order immediately, and the car arrives within 3 minutes.
Now, because competition has become fierce, taxis have also gone through industry cleanup and improved. From both an insider's view and my own ride experience, I think the overall experience is better. Then there is safety. At the beginning, we mentioned that in September 2018, China's Supreme People's Court released a report on crimes during ride-hailing and traditional taxi services. It showed that the incidence rate for ride-hailing drivers was 0.048 per 10,000 drivers, while for traditional taxi drivers, it was 0.627 per 10,000, 13 times higher for taxis. Traditional taxis also had a slightly higher proportion of violent and drug-related crimes, over 43% compared with 40% for ride-hailing. When the 10 ministries entered ride-hailing platforms that year, people from the public security system were actually quite positive. They wanted to cooperate with ride-hailing platforms because information could be shared. Criminal records could be connected directly to registration. GPS trajectory data, recordings, and video configurations could help later investigations. In the cases we discussed earlier, the customer service system mishandled things, but the existence of information records is still important for safety. The broader data is meaningful.
According to the China Ride-Hailing Safety Development Research Report released in November 2019 by the Information Research Institute of the Ministry of Emergency Management, from 2012 to 2018, the traffic accident fatality rate per 100 million kilometers for cruising taxis continued to decline, and in 2018 fell to 0.36. In 2018, Didi's figure was 0.26, 10 points lower than cruising taxis.
That sounds like an inequality.
There's more data, but we won't list all of it. Overall, after product and technological transformation, ride-hailing did provide positive value to travel. Of course, this is not standing with Didi or saying everything Didi did was right. The mistakes it made, which we repeatedly mentioned, were real and serious. During its rapid run, there were problems. Later governance and regulation were reasonable. At the same time, because Didi is a single entity, when something happens, it is easy for public anger to concentrate. If a taxi incident occurs in Kunming, Yunnan, you don't think the taxi company in Hangzhou has a problem. But with Didi, everyone uses the same platform, so major events are easy to focus on. Overall, the issue is complicated. It's not enough to say, as people did when emotions were high, companies like Didi shouldn't exist. Or, should we just abolish ride-hailing and return to the pastoral taxi era? That's not how it works. People are less emotional now. Similarly, if you destroy Meituan because of delivery platform issues, you don't solve the problem. If you destroy Pinduoduo because of e-commerce platform issues, do you solve the problem? In future AI, if you destroy Musk, that also doesn't solve the problem. In recent years, as users, people may have fewer objections, but food delivery workers and ride-hailing drivers seem to have more. And the objections are not always from years ago. New controversies emerge. As we said before, when a negative event appears, we shouldn't immediately decide the platform is the villain in a TV drama. This also raises another question. People can't figure out who made the money. Instinctively, many people think the platform took it all. But a closer analysis might show that users captured a lot of the value because the costs we pay have fallen. There is a gap between perception and the actual commercial or economic model. As mentioned earlier, from the commission perspective, a 20% take rate from drivers looks high. Didi is a huge platform and it seems to earn a lot per order. But some of that money is returned to drivers through incentives. Some drivers indeed may not receive those returns, which makes the issue complicated. The same is true for food delivery. In the Meituan episode, we mentioned that delivery can even be a loss-making business for Meituan because delivery costs are so high. Are delivery workers trapped in algorithms? Is their work painful? Are there traffic safety problems? Yes. At the same time, delivery creates many job opportunities, and many people really need those jobs. The issue is complicated. Overall, as I've said many times, I am personally a technological optimist. I believe the radical changes brought by technology and business do create problems, but after hitting walls, they tend to revert toward the mean. We shouldn't simply kill them with one blow. I've expressed this view before. That's it for today.
Because Liu Fei is a formal practitioner, for this industry, he's not only an observer, he has personal experience. So the perspective is especially useful. I imagine that among our listeners, especially listeners in fourth-tier cities, some may even be driving while listening to this episode.
Really? Last time, Boss Zhi said he took a ride in Tianjin and the driver was listening to Bang Latte.
Right. Understanding more of this can help people sort out their thinking and sometimes make their feelings smoother. It depends on the person. Liu Fei and I are probably the kind of people who, when we understand something more deeply, more objectively, and more comprehensively, our emotions become less intense. From another angle, the fact that Didi stopped new registrations for a year and a half and still came back with those numbers is astonishing. Industries are different. In other industries, don't even say a year and a half. After a month and a half, especially at today's internet speed, you might be gone. That's why when one side subsidizes, the other must follow immediately. They fear that if any gap appears, it could become Waterloo, and by tomorrow or next year, you might not even know where you are.
Different stages are very different. Think of the early battle with Kuaidi. Cheng Wei told the board that in a few days, Kuaidi would surpass Didi, and maybe in a few months, Didi would be gone. But after Didi fought those powerful enemies and won, at that stage, regulators probably also knew what they were doing. Strong regulation did not mean killing the ride-hailing industry. The industry had already grown strong. During that long period, Gaode had just enough time to rise and become a second mountain. I suspect there was thinking behind that. Interesting. Everyone can think about it.